Great. Hello, everybody. It is nice to see you all here. Thank you for showing up. I'm Lisa Colabella. I'm new president of the Southern California ICEA chapter, and I'm happy to introduce to you Mr. Michael Finnegan. Mike is a new member of the Southern California ICEA chapter board. We're delighted to have him on it. He currently works at Boeing in El Segundo. And Mike has a master's degree in mathematics from Missouri State University. And after earning that, he joined the Business Skills Rotation Program in Boeing in St. Louis. And his first rotation was in labor estimating and pricing. And he also attended the ICEA conference in San Diego at that time. He sought other opportunities to further his career in estimating and pricing and ended up moving to Philadelphia for his second rotation. Then he was in procurement financial analysis. He spent 3 years there, attempted rotation in integrated scheduling, and then he went back to his procurement finance role. So he's done a lot of different roles there at Boeing, and then he eventually ended up in the satellite estimating and pricing, where he is in El Segundo. He currently works there as a parametric cost estimator, builds cost models, satellite proposals, and does independent cost analyses. He said that in his spare time, he can be found with one of his run clubs, either running or at the brewery, at the bowling alley, or traveling for a marathon. Anyway, again, welcome, Michael. Thank you so much for presenting. Looking forward to it. I'll go off camera now. Great to see you all.
All right. Yeah, thank you for that intro, Lisa. Yeah, so as she mentioned, I spent a lot of my career traveling around the country, working on multiple teams within the Boeing company, also working in procurement finance. So I've seen proposals from Boeing suppliers, other major defense contracting corporations. So I've seen some of their tools and processes. So over the years, it's over a decade now, which doesn't seem like that long, but yeah, it's I've seen a lot of different tools and a lot of different ways of working with data in Excel, and it seems to be a pretty common tool to use across industry. So I have a lot of thoughts and feelings that I gathered over the course of these 10 years, and so this presentation is kind of consolidating all of my lessons learned from different experiences I've had with that. So I'm gonna turn off my camera here. Not sure if you guys could have even seen me, but yeah, we'll dive right into this. So today's topic is at the surface level, preparing data for cost estimating and data consolidation techniques in Excel. Where I tricked you guys is there's also underlying tones here of creating tools that are more transparent and encourage learning within the team. So as I get started here, just want to do this quick disclaimer. The information provided in this presentation is strictly the viewpoint of Mike Finnegan, and it's not meant to reflect the views of ICEA or any outside entity. As I mentioned, I've spent 11 years in cost estimating after getting a master's degree in math. I created this presentation purely based on anecdotal data to share as various lessons learned throughout my career. And it's also meant to open a discussion on the use of simple tools to cultivate a depth of knowledge for both new and experienced cost estimators while performing the day-to-day functions in the cost estimating field. I am also an expert at run-on sentences. The goal is not to sway one way or another of which is the more correct way of doing things, and this is definitely not a sales pitch of any form. So what I do, where I've been, what I've done, I use Excel for a wide variety of tools, let's call it. The most basic is data mapping, so pulling all of our actuals from our system and then adding different fields or categories that aren't included in those canned reports, such as our system for actuals, IRE, does not communicate directly with COBRA, where we keep our EAC data and our financial analysis data. Doesn't seem intuitive, but what that creates is a system of I need to take actuals out of one system and then add additional details that aren't kept in that system with various tables and maps and whatnot. And then I also take that data from multiple programs and I consolidate everything into a database with the cost data, schedule data, technical parameters, anything related to individual programs or data sets that I have. Also within one database for everything, I escalate everything to do my data normalization. Again, keep all those outside maps in there. So pretty large databases in some instances. Other teams, it's been smaller. Then I also use Excel for BOE and pricing tools, and I've created some templates that automate BOE inputs into full like TINA compliant uh, pricing. So I have different tools that I could say how I want to estimate my hours, whether it's a lump sum of hours or if it's LOE or if it's based on history, how I want those hours to spread. I could change some toggles, and I have functions that will spread the hours. And then for the pricing, I use Power Query to get everything from that calendarized view that we're used to seeing with our BOE templates and take that into tabular form where I could build up pricing either with wrap rates or detailed cost breakdowns and then create pricing reports from that. I also, like my main job for the past 5 years has been maintaining a parametric cost model, but I've also built other types of cost models based on different proposal needs. What I don't use Excel for in this case is we do have a lot of SIRs in our cost model, cost estimating relationships that are multivariate regressions. So I do all of that not so basic stats in other tools. So I don't use Excel for that in my experience. When you try to force that, that's where Excel could start getting bogged down. The biggest thing, cost comparisons, test of reasonable charts off of that database I have are tools. And honestly, this is where about 90% of my job lies. I feel like whether I've been in estimating, I've recently moved to a more financial analysis position, working with IPT leads, gathering data to create their quarterly EACs, also managing their month-to-month spending. A lot of my time is spent in just taking the same amount of data or same types of data and putting it in different formats for different people because they need to see the data in 100,000 different ways. So a lot of what I do and a lot of where my skill set has come from is just quickly being able to use multiple methods of transforming this data set into usable formats for various types of cost reviews, various types of functions need this data. We've also created tools for procedural automations, taking that data into canned reports, sending that out. And then the more fun side of things, I would say, is the at-risk, the basic stats, the things that us estimators typically like to do. So I run the gambit there on different types of processes that I have in Excel. So this is my sneaky part of this presentation, kind of the underlying pitch that I like to make here. I understand there are plenty of tools to do this. There are plenty of tools with higher capability of Excel, especially once you get to the stats or different sorts of pricing models. In the past, I've worked with Common Pricing System, which was a beast, not friendly to use. More currently using ProPricer. Other sorts of statistical analysis packages, I guess you could call them, in various tools. What I enjoy about Excel and keeping my database there instead of SQL or trying to use R or anything like that, I feel like Excel is easier to use and create a Ubuntu sort of knowledge base for the common users. A lot of these tools I refer to as black box tools like a ProPricer, the users become just accustomed to inputs and outputs, and that's about it. And I've recently had to go back and use ProPricer for one of my proposals while I was building up my own cost model on the side. And I realized I had no way to spot check to see if what was coming out was accurate or if I had done anything in that system. As a new user, I didn't know if there's other buttons that I might have needed to hit to get everything coming out as it should. Um, and again, it brought me back to when I first started within the Boeing company. One of my customers came back and asked a question about how overhead rates were built up within the pricing. And so I went around and asked my team, hey, how does this work? I got a wide variety of answers. Most people just pointed me to our rates team and said, oh, you could just send them there. I'm the type of person, and I assume a lot of us in this room are, since we are all kind of data nerds if we're doing cost estimating. I want to know what's happening, why it's happening from start to finish. So the answer of, oh, I could point them to someone else didn't sit right with me. Um, so that's when I went through and I kind of built my first pricing tool, and it was rough. You know, it was, I think, maybe 6 months into my career, minimal experience in Excel, trying to figure things out. Even basic color schemes were atrocious. Just trying to go through and create something that existed in a tool form, but broke it down in a way that I could see exactly which one of our cost codes were hitting different overheads, why it was that way, what all these different codes meant. And then at that time, I learned a lot about um, Excel. I learned some different tips and techniques, and then I quickly became the guy on our team that was our tools guy, even though I, looking back, was nowhere near experienced enough for that. Um, but then I also became more fluent in our rates than anybody else on the estimating team at a couple months in, because I took the time to go out and take a black box tool and break it out in a way that I could understand. Again, this is where everything I'm saying is purely anecdotal. Maybe other teams out there do have these step-by-step processes for everything. In my experience, I've seen very few of them though. So what this graph on the right represents is kind of like these first few bullet points, encouraging room to tune, the step-by-step, allowing for transparency, flexibility. What my manager drew, and like I said, I recently switched teams, um, trying to describe where she saw me fitting into this team, what she saw I could do, because I'm now in a financial analysis position and I've never worked the execute side of the business. I've always just been in acquire. So I go into it like, hey, might not be able to help a lot. Um, but she kind of sees different things or different steps of these processes for tools that we're creating. And now that I have plenty of experience, 2 more years of experience building tools, she kind of broke it down into 3 different segments. And I really like this breakout of it. Um, so what this graph represents is time goes across the x-axis and the value added of the tool goes across the y-axis. So you spend the upfront time of the tool creation doing the things that, you know, a modeler or a tool builder would know more. And you get the tool up to a certain point. This mark here is 50% just for reference. Well, and then that tool can enter a stage where it's implemented to the team here in this middle section, where you're doing basic maintenance, finding things that might not have worked the way you wanted it to when you created that tool, any updates that are needed. And then during that stage, eventually you'll hit a point here, I call it 90%, again, just arbitrary numbers, but then it's just everyday use. And then you hand that off to the users. The idea behind it, and this process, and before I started creating the tools on this team, I started in the everyday use section of what are the ins and outs of this new job that I'm getting into, learning what the handoffs were, where my data come from, where my data is coming from, and where it needs to go. So I started in the everyday use, and then I start trying to see how the tools were built. And then I get to a point where I feel confident enough where I could work backwards in and create something from the ground up. Then I get it to a point where I could hand it off to someone else on the team who's going to be using it more frequently than I am. I get to go find some other process that could be sped up. And so a lot of this environment, we don't have approved tools from now in a SCIF. So nothing's approved on the inside. We get to create a lot of it on our own. And so there's a lot of work that could be done. And within that, if you, oh, didn't mean to hit that tab. As you could maybe piece together from how I talked about this, I learned a lot about the day-to-day job in building this tool. And then by handing it off to someone else who might be doing the day-to-day job already, but now they have a quicker tool to get their job done, or something that is now automated that used to not be. Well, if I hand that tool off to them, I could explain how that tool works to them. I learned their day-to-day job. Now they get to learn a little bit about different processes to build tools, how to automate things, how to speed things up, instead of being that button pusher. And there may be times, and especially what we experienced on this team, the people working there before we were able to expand the team didn't have time to build something. They had to just spend their time crunching data the hard way to get it done. But now that we had extra support come in and I got to build the tool, it becomes a trade-off of learning experience. I learn what they do, they learn what I do. And then if I allow them to take over that tool, they get to learn more about tool maintenance and might have better ideas than what I had to make things better. So throughout the use of the same tool, various aspects of the team, you get something that eventually appears running smoothly. And more importantly, everybody's learned something about the job function. I feel like, again, anecdotal here, um, a lot of that is hard to come by if you just use commercial off-the-shelf tools, or if you have someone who is strictly your tools man on the team who wants to build tools. And I know from my experience, I've seen a lot of tools in Excel that are just as black box as any COTS type of product you could get. So again, back to my list over here now. The other benefit of doing this in Excel is if you learn how things are built up, and you could easily translate templates of these tools to a different sort of product or team, take sort of the same type of functions, build up, and build something new with it. A lot easier than if you just have some canned report that you're given saying, hey, click these buttons, do this job. So off the bat, in my procurement financial analysis job, where is a lot of data analytics of supplier data, so we had to have different tools to do things. But my mentor on that team gave me the quote of grab, snag, claim, and rename. And so I took that to heart. That's how I live my career now. Something else exists, I'm going to steal it and then manipulate that for my new use in a new tool. I'm not going to spend time reinventing the wheel when, I've gone through and created some of these templates now that are multi-use. The other benefit of doing this is kind of what I alluded to with my pricing tool is I had no cross check. So once I've learned how to build tools in Excel and I have something quick and dirty, even if it's not approved, it could still be a simple cross check to my black box tools that I might need to use. And then clearly, again, with the basic stats and ANOVA tables that are already built into Excel for our basic stats analysis. Again, anecdotal here, I find macro coding and VBA to be a much easier language to learn than other programming languages. And especially with that record feature where you could click around and the macro will record what you're doing and those keystrokes you take or whatever functions you do. And it writes the script for you. And so from that, you have a basis, and then you could start building on that to maybe eventually I do find needs for other programming languages, but I've got that base. And also by having that, I could also build on that within VBA, and it gives me a starting point. Other coding languages I know are super rough to learn and can be, it's a tough learning curve, but I feel like Excel kind of smooths that out a little bit. And along with that same note, I don't think there's been anything that I can't find with a quick Google search. The dangers of these tools, obviously the creator is the sole source. So of the insides of the tool. So if you build a tool that starts to become too complicated and not easy to follow through, and you need to have macros working behind the scenes to get your tool to work, totally understandable in some cases. But if you don't relay that knowledge to the rest of the team in some way, shape, or form, if you decide you need a different job or you win the lottery, or like I like to say, if I get hit by a bus, all that knowledge of how that tool works is gone. And someone, especially if you're the tools guy on your team and you haven't disseminated a lot of that information, that tool dies with you. So one thing I like to do is every new tool that I'm creating, maybe not right off the bat, but eventually, but as I'm getting ready to roll it out, I always create a tab, and that tab is literally called "If I Get Hit by a Bus," and it walks through what I was thinking when I created things, how I use different formulas, different explanations, um, just annotate as much as I can there. Another danger, maybe not danger, but Excel is not pretty. There are plenty of other data visualization tools, Tableau, for instance, that do way better as far as like chartsmanship presentations go. Excel gets the basics done. Um, Another danger and something that I'm actually working through right now is um, simplifying, for lack of a better term, a tool that someone else has created, because there are so many macros in there and some of them are triggered. If you change one cell on one tab, everything starts recalculating. But if you change something on another tab, it might change something on that first tab. And it's a cyclical process, and that tab that should take you 3 seconds to get what you need might take 5 minutes. And we all know technology, as soon as it doesn't work, it's the most insanely frustrating thing you can imagine. So trying to build the tools in a way that avoids all of that chug and the churn. Um, Obviously, once we get to larger companies, Boeing, for instance, and we have to work with government customers, compliance is a huge issue. If you're building something off the cuff and it hasn't been vetted in any way, shape, or form, you're at risk of a compliance issue. Whereas most of these other tools, yeah, they have been vetted. So that's where, again, I use the um, like my pricing tool. I don't use it for a TINA compliant proposal. Luckily, I don't have a lot of those to do, but I do have it in my back pocket for a ROM, for a cross check, anything like that. Another thing that I found myself doing a lot of is once first needs. Um, and I think we see this in the estimating world a lot. When you got a new project that you're bidding, you always have to make sure, like, your inputs that you're getting from your engineers, it's like, hey, is this test we're doing something that's actually needed for the requirements of this proposal? Is it included in the RFP, or is this just something you want to design and build, right? I have that same issue when I build my own tools. I find some tricks that are cool. They might not add any value to that tool. And then it becomes a want versus a need of answering that question. So it's constantly keeping that in check. And again, slimming things down, keeping things running efficiently, because we know Excel can get bogged down easily. And then the last thing I found, again, purely anecdotal, other entities or even teams within Boeing might have a better experience with this than I have. Tool creators not being involved in daily processes. This kind of ties back to the once first needs. You start getting people siloed off into creating their tools. Well, now we have them designing something that might not answer our day-to-day needs. Or that first issue there, if something gets reorged, those people aren't on your team anymore, people leave, and they aren't involved in those daily processes, no one on the day-to-day function of the team has experience with those tools, everything's lost. So again, cautions there, but that kind of goes back to what I was saying on this previous chart here of learning how to pass things off between different members of the team, and also getting maybe newer estimators experience working with a tool that's already built. Instead of saying, hey, go design something, you give them something that's like, hey, I'd already designed this, I want you to take it over now, update, maintain. Someone else with a different experience can make it a lot better. And it's getting rid of some of these issues here on this tab that I list. Clearly there's other dangers here. This is just my quick list that I put together. So the biggest thing is everybody complains Excel is too slow. And is that 100% true, or is that just the way people are using it? So I've had everybody on my team complain about a new tool that was rolled out that I didn't get to touch yet, and I'm going to soon. The first thing I noticed, file size massive. Opening takes 5 minutes. Okay, like something needs to be fixed here. So I open it up, and the first two things I always look for when I go to a new file is how many links to external sources do I have? And are we using VLOOKUPs or index match, or in the newer versions of Excel, I forget which one it came out. I know 365 has it. Maybe it was 2019. I don't know. I'm behind on the versions I have, but the new XLOOKUP feature. Um, if you're doing one cell at a time, VLOOKUP versus index match, not much difference. If you're building an entire table using VLOOKUPs in every formula cell, you're bogging down your file. What I've found in this other tool, again, all anecdotal, maybe you guys don't have this issue. I had a entire, I don't know, 10, 12 columns worth of formulas of 200,000 rows. Every single one of those was a VLOOKUP to an external source. So everybody was like, oh, we can't do inception to date actuals because there's too much data, it bogs down the system. By fixing these simple things, so before they, I think, brought in 4 or 5 data sources, inception to date actuals, linked to all those outside sources, and then did the VLOOKUPs off those. By changing that and finding a way to bring those tables in, hard code everything that needed to be mapped off of, write a macro that brings in the stacked actuals that I need to stack, and have a macro go through, use index match to fill out the mapping instead of the VLOOKUPs. I'm now, I think, over a year further into the program, still pulling ITD actuals. I've also pulled from 20 sources now instead of the 5 they have, and my file is still smaller and faster than what the original one was. So basic things like this, get rid of, oh, Excel's too slow. Whoops. And then I also have a macro that I'm going to show on slides 7 and 8. I love the copy paste macros, as I call them. There's something easy to find online. I'm going to let you copy paste this one because we are going to send these slides out. Again, this is nothing I created. This is grab, snag, claim, rename, data I found on the internet. But a macro is included in this PowerPoint that will open up external sources that you have saved to your server, paste that data into your new file, close that other workbook out, and then it could add multiple sources to that. It also brings in other tables. I also have a macro in here that automates the index match and then pastes values to override those extra formulas. It's all in here. We'll, time permitting, get to show some of those examples. Another thing I found is conditional formattings can ruin a file. It looks pretty, might get data to the surface a little bit faster, but it does bog down a file quite a bit. And then another thing I found, and this is when I was working with tables trying to insert rows, it says, oh, you've exceeded the amount of rows in Excel. That's over 1 million, so I know I wasn't using that many. Excel can hide blank cells within a document. So there's a little eraser button, I'll highlight that in a second too, where you could go clear content, clear formatting, clear all, and it reduces that file size. Because I had something blow up on me out of nowhere, and I don't, still to this day, don't know how it did it, but it had data hidden in empty cells. It was weird. The next thing that I really enjoy doing is reducing the columns in generated reports. So we have these canned reports that pull our actuals for us. And I was looking at it. I have a quick example here, but I realized I didn't need all of the columns in the report, and columns add more data than rows will. So my quick example here is if I have 100,000 rows of data, but only, and 10 columns that I'm looking at, but if I'm only using 7 of those columns, that's 3 columns that I don't need. 3 times 100,000 rows is 300,000 cells that I don't need. So dividing that 300,000 cells by 7 for the 7 remaining columns means that I could add almost 43,000 rows of data to this report and still come out as the same size. So this is kind of what I did up top in that earlier example I talked about. Our report was, I think, actually 36 columns, and I narrowed it down to 22 that I could get away with using. So when you think about that size difference, that's almost, I don't know, 40%, again, kind of similar to my example here. That's a lot more data that I could pull in and work with now and still have my document working just as quickly. And then simplifying the formulas and macros. So again, that macro I said that was like auto calculating everything, bogging things down. There's different formulas like the VLOOKUPs I mentioned. There's also volatile functions that will, anytime you change one cell in a document, they'll recalculate themselves. Something like the today function, rand or rand between, which is your random number generators, indirect functions, and SumIfs, which I love SumIfs. Everything I do is index match with a SumIf. So I won't get away with those, but those are more that if you change something, they start recalculating. And another macro that I have in the back here is how to keep one row of your formulas, and then if you have, 100,000 rows of formulas, that's going to be a lot of calculation. But if we have a macro to paste special values on top of that data instead, it clears up the amount that your document has to think. Again, plenty of other ways to go through and make sure your document can be slimmed down, like making sure, like images, for example, if you have a ton of images in there, or if you have a ton of graphs that are based on data that are all formula-based tables, that's going to slow things down. This is not meant to be a comprehensive list. This is just things that I check for when I go through and take over something. All right, how to get a drink of water. Didn't realize I've been going 30 minutes already. All right, so one thing I use, and this is that data consolidation aspect, so we're finally getting to the point of this. So one of the programs I work with, and even my last database I had is, I think the last database was 140 programs, 130, somewhere in that, over hundreds, a ton. You don't want to be going in, and if I need to stack this data in a database from multiple different sources, doing it by hand could be a lot. Having to link to this data from other documents is going to bog things down. So what I see a lot is people will be like, oh, I'll just create a query off that document and something else. Well, that slows your file down immensely. So what this macro does here, I think I could zoom in. Did that work? Hopefully it worked. Kind of.
Yeah, it works.
Okay, cool. So again, this is a copy paste sort of macro that I stole. I added a little bit to it, and then I also kind of try to color code things that you would need to change in yours. But what this is going to do is take a data tab from your workbook, and if we need to refresh that data or append that data in some way, shape, or form, this is the way I go through and do it. Again, 100,000 different ways to do this. But if I'm consolidating that information from a outside source or multiple sources, this macro will go through, it cleans up the tab that you want to work on. I call it the destination tab. That range is whatever my table range is in whatever workbook I'm working in. So it selects that entire section and clears the contents here. And then it goes through everything with a little apostrophe here. If you're not familiar with VBA code, when you write that script, and I'll show you in the developer in a second. If you put the little apostrophe up there, it turns it into a comment. So one thing that I definitely encourage is adding comments as much as possible within your code. So if someone has to go use it or update it while you're out on vacation or something, they could do that. So the next thing that this workbook's open is going to search whatever file source you're going to open up that new document. It is now your active workbook. It's going to select your data table and copy it. And then we transfer back over to our destination workbook and destination tab, and it just pastes that data in and closes our source data. So the benefit of doing this, again, is keeping links out, keeping human error out, because it's going to go through and do it for you. Macros are better than me at a certain point. And then something like this, the only thing that might change is your source. So if someone moves that source document to a new file or a new folder location, that's going to screw up your workbook and you're going to get those ref errors because Excel can't go through and find that document anymore. To be fair, that's going to happen if you have an external link in your workbook anyway. But when you have a code written, all you have to do is update this file path. So not too dangerous. The other pros is I could stack as many multiple sources as I need with additional code. I could also change this to be like a do loop for those of you familiar with coding, and it'll cycle through every source that I have in a given folder and open it and add it. And then there's also some cool things that it could do, like if I have a file name that I'm pulling data from where the end of it might change, like if a date is updated. So I pull material data in. The people who own that file like to save a revision with the date at the end. I could search for a partial file name and still open that data source with this macro. And on the next slide, I'll get to it in a second. I'll show you that. So what I'm going to do here is just demo that macro real quick. I've created a fake workbook. Everything you see in here is fake, random generated numbers, values. I was playing Mario Party a lot with my siblings over the weekend. So everything here is Mario related, not any defense industry. So nothing here is real. Values are all fake. Any wrap rates you might see in here, all random number generated. So what I'm going to do, say I have 1 month of actuals here. I'm going to run a macro that's going to go into my folder here. I have an actuals report from program A. And it might open up in a second. So imagine this to be your actuals report. We use IRE here at Boeing, but this is who's charging what, how much of their time, and where. And it's a ton of data here. Again, all random number generated. So what my macro is going to do, and if you don't have the developer tab on your Excel, underneath file, we could go into options, and this might look different depending on what version of Excel you have. But in our customized ribbon, you should see a developer box. And if that box is not checked, all you have to do is check that code, hit OK, and it'll pop up here on your ribbon. So I'm going to open Visual Basic. Again, you could see my code here. Oh, not that code. That's a different code. I think it's module 1. So here's my macro called bring in actuals. And I can't zoom in on this, unfortunately. But you could see I replaced the file names with my actual file names, my source data with the actual link here. So what this macro is going to do is it's going to open up that outside source, paste it over my table here, and also clear out anything that was there before. So I could go to macros. I'm going to use my bring in actuals macro, run that real quick. And there we go. Everything from that other document for program A actuals is now loaded up in here. The next thing is I have additional mapping that I might need with my actuals report. This data, like I mentioned earlier, our actuals reports don't talk to Cobra where we keep our EAC data, all our control account work package information. That's all separate. So I have to map that data to get it to a format that our IPTs can think about it in. They don't like to think in charge lines or charge codes. They think in work packages or anything else. So what my workbook has here, and I should have highlighted these a different color like I do in most of my workbooks. These are all formulas here, and I'm going to keep these here. I could also write a macro that rewrites these formulas, but for now, I just have them hard-coded. As you can see, I have a ton of index match, a couple roundups. Oh, this is a fun one that I created just to create a quarter demonstration or year. Given time, we could go into that later. But I might want to round up by business unit or division instead of just by individuals, right? So I'm going to add this extra mapping in here using my index match functions that are super helpful. The problem is you can manually go through, copy these, select your entire range of data, and do your paste formulas, right? I could also have a macro do that for me. So I also have, this is in the PowerPoint as well, a copy paste formulas flip to it here, so it might be easier to read. This one's a little trickier, just in the sense that I have to figure out how far down I want to paste these values. I could do a dummy paste and take it all the way to the bottom of the workbook, but then that's creating an extra million or so rows of data that I don't need. So what this macro is going to do, it's going to search and find the last row that I have data in. So it should return 15,681. I have this macro written, right? So here it's going to find the total range needed. It's going to paste whatever I want that last row to be in cell N1. And I do this as a checks and balance to make sure my macro is working efficiently. Then I'm going to copy my formula and paste it over this entire range. That's what it's doing here. It's finding that last row again, and then I'll paste special values. So again, that's to increase the runtime of this file going forward if other people need to use it for something. It's going to paste these formulas and then hard code those values below here all in one quick motion. So I'm going to go to my macros, copy paste formulas. And I had that formatting there. So it takes the orange all the way down, but you could see it updated everything. And it's all mapped for me now. Everything but my top row is going to be hard coded values instead of formulas. So I keep that runtime down. So that's just one. At a certain point, you're like, hey, I could copy paste and just go just as fast with this. Like I said, I had 20 sources for what I do, so it gets a little bogged down at times. So what I could do, is extend that macro. The only thing that's going to be a little bit trickier of it is it's pretty much a copy paste from that original formula that I have, or original script that I have, the code, copy paste that. I just have to find a new starting point for where I want to paste my data. So if you recall in the first one, and you probably won't because I breezed right through it, I select A1 for where I want to paste my data. The problem is if I just copy paste this entire chunk of code here down below, it's going to paste over A1 again. So the only thing that's going to change in my code is I'm going to tell it to, instead of take A1, from A1, I'm going to go down. Excel down means I'm just going to control down arrow to the bottom of the sheet and then offset by 1. So it works the same as our offset function in Excel. It controls down to the bottom of the table and then selects the next cell down, which would be 15,682. So I'm going to run that macro real quick. And I have it call in, bring in more actuals. So run that, it's going to bring my program A. And if you notice in my file, I also had program B in here. So now you can see starting in 15,682, it pasted a new data set. Okay. And then again, I could go through and update my copy paste formulas. And now it goes all the way down to the bottom. And my checks and balances up here says my last row is 31,361. And sure enough, down here is 31,361. So these are the kinds of things that I like to incorporate in what I do. Again, summarizing, because I'm getting close on time here. I could talk for hours because I do enjoy this stuff a whole lot. I get a job you love to do. Yeah, here's my code, and here you guys could copy paste. It's simple tricks like this that I've picked up over 10 years. Everything I've done with Excel is self-taught clearly because it's not the prettiest. but it's the fact that I've had people around me that encourage trying out new things, not just using the canned reports and going through and the politically correct way to say it would be screw around and find out, I guess, of what works and what doesn't work, what is going to add value, what's just for fun. Um, but in the long run, so this process that I've been talking about with the 5 data sources that became 20, it took someone's 2 week process down to a matter of minutes to go through and do this. And a lot of it was monotonous. And once we get it to a point where we could automate bringing in all the data, we map all the data, we have our, I could either pivot on this myself or have the macro pivot on it for me. It feeds all that data directly to our seed roles. So now it's a spot check and making sure totals match from one table to the next instead of going through and doing the grunt work and taking up all the time to just click the buttons that you have to do, instead of finding a way to speed up that process so you could do the actual analysis of the job. So in my presentation here, again, running short on time. So the basic functions that I use for everything that I found most beneficial is index match as opposed to a VLOOKUP. Or if you have the new version of Excel, I think XLOOKUP is a little easier to use than index match. Stacking index match is a little easier than stacking XLOOKUP though. So index match meaning I can match something off a row and a column, much easier using this than XLOOKUP. That's just me. I use SumIfs a lot. So between SumIfs and index match, I could recreate any pivot table or anything you want to do quicker. It also helps me spot check information. The next thing I recommend trying to learn is copy paste macros, as I call them. Find these macros to do like whatever your basic job function is. That's a lot of clicking, a lot of moving data around, a lot of mapping data. And then it opens the gate to learning that code and learning other tricks and tips that you could apply somewhere else. And then it gives you a basic building block of, hey, I could do this in Excel. Let's see what else I could build on. And it's encouraging that growth. And you might find something to apply to a different tool. The other functions that I didn't quite have time for are offsets and Power Query. Both of these are very useful offsets when I'm time phasing data or doing my BOEs where I want to spread hours over different areas. Power Query is what I use for my, I don't know what you want to call it, like a black market pricing tool that I have. Everything ProPricer does is taking things to a tabular form and then applying the rates to it. With Power Query, you could do that exact same thing in Excel. Yeah, so I don't have time for that pricing model, unfortunately. So I'll go ahead and wrap up real quick. So the conclusion of this is I'm not saying don't use black box tools. I'm saying use them when necessary, but also think of ways to explain what is happening in those black box tools to both newer and experienced estimators on your team. So they understand and the why of what's happening instead of just how to hit the buttons. And it also encourages that critical thinking to saying, why is my answer correct? And not just, well, that's what the tool told me. Like I said, use transparent, quote unquote, tools for teaching, training, expanding skill sets when necessary. Again, like I said, these basic tools that I have take weeks off of someone's job, and now they have an additional 80 hours to invest doing analysis. And I think the biggest thing, and my last little soapbox on top of all the other soapboxes I have, allow for the opportunity to pass off tools to other team members. It's something that's very hard for me. I have a takeover spirit and I have a control issue. So it's something that I've been learning over the past couple of years is letting go, letting other people learn how to do it, take responsibility for it. And then I get to go do something else. I also get to learn something new. So I found a new joy in being able to hand off something I've done to someone else. And if they totally butcher it and turn it into something else, that's fine. They're the ones using it. I'm playing with my new toys over here. But yeah, it avoids all of that, that sole creator issue. And just one knowledge source for everything and starts expanding growth across the entire team. So with that, I don't know if there's any questions. I haven't been looking at a chat. I don't know if people have dropped off or have muted me or anything. So with that, I'll open it up.
That is the
Questions,
hard
comments?
part. That's the hard part about webinars. You just don't know if you're bombing. But I've found it.
Wait, did I bomb? I thought I was doing great.
Oh, you're
Oh
doing
no.
great. See,
Oh
um,
no.
right. So no, in my experience, it seems like the fewer questions means you've really impressed everybody and put them into silence. Yeah. From what I've seen as a less active user of Excel than you guys, I've seen some things that I'm very interested in, and that mystery cell problem has hit me before as well. So this is the sort of information that I think everybody's going to fire up Excel and start playing with right away. Um, and for everybody listening now, the recording of the session will be up on our YouTube channel tomorrow around lunchtime, and we'll also provide the slides on our website, iciaonline.com/SoCal. We did just get a question in. Oh, two. We'll start with, did you initially record the macro for external data sources? And records in quotes there. Let's see.
So with that one, if you try to record that macro of opening up another Excel file, the developer does not write that part down of how to access those other workbooks. So that was, again, my handy dandy Google searches taught me how to do that. But yeah, to look back specifically at the code, it will not do this part here. So you need to define what that variable is. I just call it WB for workbook, and have this source in here. Once it's open, then you could switch back and forth with the activate function, but the code will not do this part for you.
Can you open up Excel real quick and show us the formatting eraser? Do you have any Excel files to choose from? I'm not sure I'm seeing any on your desktop there.
Oh, yeah, I mentioned that little erase button, right?
Yeah, sorry.
Um, Yeah, so on the home screen here, so what I found, like, I was trying to do something simple, like right click, insert rows, right? And I kept getting an error message saying there's too much data. And I would scroll to the bottom of my workbook real quick and see all these blank cells. Um, Again, handy dandy Google search. If I highlighted all of those rows below where my table was, there's a little eraser over here in your editing portion of the home toolbar. So towards the right, if it's clear, you could just go to clear all. And then it deleted a ton of hidden cells that I had no clue were there. And every now and then I'll find this when I bring in data and I paste it. Like say there's some things that I do where I'm looking up individual names and not every cell here is filled out. And typically, if you do like a control down, it will stop your control down. If you could see where my cursor is moving here, it'll stop right above a blank cell. But every now and then, if you do that, it might jump all the way down to the bottom of the table, meaning that Excel is reading something here, even though if you click in it, it's totally blank. I don't know why it does that every now and then, but that's something where you would just need to go in, highlight those, and hit that clear all button. And then, well, in this case, it took out my formatting. Yeah.
Okay, and
Um,
then I think we're going to do one last question before we wrap it up for everybody. You mentioned a potential compliance issue when using Excel. Can you explain that a little more?
I just mean from the extent of if I build a pricing tool off the cuff and want to say I'm going to use that for BOE or for TINA compliant pricing purposes, and it's not vetted by any source, and I have some error in there that no one's looked through and validated, I'm at risk for defective pricing. Sorry, I haven't had to use that word in a while, right? So it's one of those like once you have the tool that's accepted and maintained and saying, yes, we all must use this pricing tool. theoretically it's been vetted. There's still maybe a chance for errors, but if I'm doing something on my own, that's where I get a little cautious about it. And I'll try to, like I said, I just like to create checks and balances. And then for a ROM, sure, where it's not, I'm just using wrap rates, I'm more confident to use that. And then the last thing I want to mention real quick, I kind of forgot to, as I was wrapping up, the back of my PowerPoint presentation here, I put a lot of how-tos for the basic functions that I use. Not all of them, but I try to go through and define like what I mean by index match functions, how those work in Excel, different basic examples using tables, showing what a formula would be and what that return value would be. So I do index match, I do like basic escalation examples, I talk about XLOOKUP, SumIfs. Again, you'll see my love of Nintendo Super Mario in here. If statements and offsets. So it's all in here. It's all stuff I found. It's all stuff I want to share. I want everybody to be better at this. Yeah, that's all I got.
Well, I think it's a lot.
I mean, I could keep going.
Yeah. You've given a whole lot of useful info and useful tools for everybody in a short amount of time. Once again, everyone, these slides will be up on ICEAonline.com/SoCal around this time tomorrow. I'm going to let Lisa close it out for us, but thank you everybody for joining. Go ahead, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Megan, and thanks everybody for attending. I just wanted to say that if any of you would like to volunteer for a webinar in the future, you're most welcome. You can go to the ICEA SoCal website. If you have trouble finding that, just send me an email if you have my email address. There's also a workshop coming up, an in-person workshop that's going to be at El Segundo at Aerospace Corporation with Rick Garcia as the on-site host. And so we're also looking for a few more speakers for that too. If you're interested in visiting El Segundo, or if you are in El Segundo or nearby and want to speak at that, would be great. So please get in touch. Again, the ICEA SoCal website, information about how to volunteer for those. There's a link for that. Also, there's the big annual workshop coming up for Big ICEA, May 13th to 15th. Hope to see you there. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Loved your presentation. I learned a lot. I thought it was great. Great lessons learned. I especially appreciate the stuff about making Excel faster. For me, that's really, really helpful. But sorry we didn't get to the topic of offsets and Power Query. Maybe at your next webinar. So
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you again. Really appreciate it. And yeah,
Yeah,
really glad
thanks,
to be
everybody.
available as recording.
All right. Thank you, guys.